I sold my company last month, I said, like I was passing the potatoes. I walked away with about 160 million. My sister Sophie's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My mom blinked like she'd misheard me. My dad didn't move at all, just stared, frozen, like someone had turned the lights off behind his eyes. For one strange second, nobody had anything to say. And I swear, in that silence, I finally heard what my childhood sounded like. Because I learned how to disappear when I was 9. That was the year Sophie turned 18 and got her first car, a bright red BMW with a giant bow on the hood. Our driveway looked like a commercial. Neighbors wandered over to admire it. Cameras flashed. My parents laughed like they'd won an award. I watched from my bedroom window in a thrift store sweater that still smelled like someone else's laundry detergent. I didn't even go outside. Nobody called me. I wasn't grounded. I wasn't busy. I just wasn't part of the scene. Sophie was 7 years older than me, and she had this gravity. Everything orbited her. My parents were younger when they had her, more energetic, more hopeful. She got the version of them that still believed the world was watching. By the time I showed up, the excitement had drained out of the house. Baby pictures of me were rare. My school projects weren't framed. My birthdays were simple this year every year. My dad ran a small insurance business in Connecticut. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. The comfort just never reached me in ways that mattered. Sophie got private school. I got the public school here is perfectly fine. Sophie got a new laptop for her studies. I got her old one, sticky keys, cracked corner. Sophie got spring break trips and sorority photos and dinners where my parents leaned in like every word she said was a headline. I got asked to clear plates. If I tried to speak, I learned quickly to time it between everyone else's sentences, like squeezing air from a closing elevator door. Most of the time, I didn't bother. A lot of kids act out when they feel ignored. I did the opposite. I became quiet on purpose. In our house, being good meant being easy, not needing rides, not needing money, not needing reassurance. I was so good at it that people mistook it for independence instead of survival. The first time I realized my invisibility could be useful was in middle school. My parents didn't know what I was doing after school. They assumed I was fine. So I took the bus to the library instead. At the library, nobody cared who I was. Nobody cared if I asked dumb questions. I could sit at a computer for 3 hours, and nobody would tell me to stop being annoying. That's where I found coding. Not because I had some grand dream, because the internet was the first place that talked back to me. I started with cheap tutorials, basic HTML, then JavaScript. Then I learned I could make things happen on a screen just by typing. It felt like control, like proof I existed. At 15, I got my first job at a grocery store. Not because my parents made me. They didn't care either way. I did it because I wanted a reason not to be home. I liked the predictability. Stock shelves, clock out, walk away, and I liked the paycheck. Sophie saw the uniform once and laughed. "Oh, look at you being all responsible." My mom smiled like she was proud, but it was the kind of pride you give a little kid when they draw a lopsided house. Cute, small, safe. My dad didn't even look up from the TV. Don't let it mess with your grades. That was the only advice I got. So I held on to my grades like they were my escape hatch. I took every advanced class I could. I applied for scholarships without telling anyone. I wrote essays at midnight with the glow of my broken laptop lighting up my room. Sometimes I'd hear my parents downstairs talking about Sophie's engagement prospects like it was a business deal. Which families were good, which boyfriends were serious, what kind of wedding she deserved. Nobody ever asked what I wanted. When I got accepted into a solid state school with a scholarship, my mom hugged me with one arm while texting with the other. "That's great, honey," she said, already looking past me. "Sophie, did you see the florist's email?" I didn't cry. I told myself I didn't need them to be excited. Then I went upstairs and sat on my bed in the dark until my breathing stopped shaking. College was where I stopped being invisible, not overnight, but little by little. I joined a computer science club. I sat in the front row. I asked questions. I made friends who noticed if I didn't show up. It was disorienting, like stepping into sunlight after years in a basement. I started freelancing small projects, websites for local businesses, simple scheduling tools, anything that paid. The more I built, the more my brain started connecting dots. I saw how messy small companies were behind the scenes. They had inventory in spreadsheets, orders on sticky notes, deliveries tracked by texts between employees. Everything was chaos held together by people who were already tired. One night, after helping a friend's uncle who owned a small warehouse, I wrote a simple program to automate his ordering and restocking. It wasn't fancy. It just worked. And when it worked, he looked at me like I'd just performed magic. That look stayed with me, so I kept going. After graduation, I took a boring job that paid the bills. During the day, I sat in meetings, listening to managers talk in circles. At night, I built my own software piece by piece in my tiny apartment. I didn't tell my family, not because I was hiding it, because it didn't occur to me they would care. But once I tried anyway. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Sophie was there with her fiancé, Chad. Perfect teeth, loud laugh, always talking about networks and opportunities. I mentioned carefully, "I've been working on something, a product, for supply companies. It might actually—" Sophie cut me off mid-sentence. "Oh my God, Dad, tell Chad about the time you closed that big insurance deal in '09. My dad lit up like a switch flipped. "Yeah, so listen." And just like that, my words evaporated. I sat there while they told their stories over mine. I nodded at the right moments. I swallowed my pride with my food. On the drive home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt, and something inside me finally snapped clean. Not in a dramatic way, not rage, just clarity. I realized I kept handing them chances to see me, like holding up a photo in front of a blind person and waiting for them to describe it. They weren't going to, so I stopped. I stopped calling. I stopped updating them. I stopped trying to earn a reaction from people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I poured everything into the product. I named it Supply Sync because I wanted the goal to be obvious. Connect the mess, reduce the noise, make the work lighter. At first it was just me. Then it was me and one freelance designer. Then it was me, a designer, and a part-time support guy who answered emails while I slept. Then, quietly, without fireworks, a medium-sized distributor signed a contract. The first real one. I stared at the signed agreement on my screen for a full minute, waiting for a catch, a typo, a prank, something. But it was real. Money hit my account 2 weeks later. Not life-changing money. Not yet. But enough to prove I wasn't imagining it. Enough to make my heart race as I refreshed the banking app like it might disappear. I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming outside my window, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous. And the next email that came in made my breath hitch, because it wasn't from a customer. It was from someone I'd never heard of, with a subject line that read, interested in acquiring Supply Sync. By the time that acquisition email showed up, I'd already learned one important rule. Good things don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly, like a door cracking open. I read the message 3 times. Then I forwarded it to myself just in case it vanished. Then I closed my laptop and paced my apartment like a trapped animal. It wasn't even a huge corporation. It was a mid-sized logistics software company. They wanted to discuss strategic options. That's the polite way of saying, "We want what you built." I didn't reply right away. I waited 2 days on purpose. Not because I was playing games, because I needed to understand what I actually had. So I called a lawyer. Then I called an accountant. And then, for the first time, I called someone who mattered. A mentor from my old computer science club who'd gone into startups. He listened to me explain Supply Sync like it was some small side project. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "You know this isn't small, right?" I stared at my kitchen wall. "It feels small." "That's because you built it in silence," he said. "But if they're sniffing around this early, you're sitting on something that scales." That word, scales, made my stomach flip. Because the truth was, it already had. The distributor who signed first told another distributor, then another. My support inbox started filling up faster than I could answer. I hired a second support person, then a third. I added features. I cleaned up the interface. I built onboarding flows so customers didn't need me to hold their hand. I stopped sleeping like a normal person. In the mornings, I had my boring corporate job. At night, I turned into someone else, someone sharper, someone who didn't ask permission. After 6 months, I quit the day job. No dramatic resignation speech. I just emailed my manager and said, "I'm pursuing another opportunity." He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, and I laughed because honestly, that level of care felt familiar. Except this time, it didn't hurt. Supply Sync became my whole world. Contracts got bigger. Clients asked for integrations with their existing systems. I built them. Some weeks I lived on protein bars and coffee and adrenaline. I hired my first full-time engineer, then another. Then we needed an office, which sounded ridiculous, until the third time a client asked, "Are you a real company?" We were. We had a tiny space with cheap chairs and a whiteboard that never erased properly. But when I walked in and heard people talking about my product like it mattered, I felt this weird pressure behind my eyes, like my brain didn't know what to do with being taken seriously. The offers didn't stop. They just got better. A larger firm reached out, then an even larger one, then a private equity group that wanted to invest for growth. That one made me nervous. It felt like the kind of money that comes with strings. So I kept doing what I always did. I stayed calm. I worked. I built. And I negotiated like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. Every meeting was a test. They'd try to praise me into lowering my guard. They'd try to overwhelm me with spreadsheets. They'd try to talk around my questions instead of answering them. I learned to sit in silence until they filled it. I learned to say, "Put that in writing." I learned to walk away mid-call if something felt off. One man actually laughed and said, "You're tough for someone who came out of nowhere." I smiled politely. "I didn't come out of nowhere. You just weren't looking." By year 3, Supply Sync wasn't just a product. It was a machine. We had hundreds of customers. Warehouses in multiple states were running their daily operations through software I designed on a cracked laptop. That thought hit me randomly sometimes, like stepping on an invisible wire. We had payroll, health insurance plans, a support team, a sales lead who spoke in bullet points, an operations manager who reminded me to eat lunch. And I had money. Not billionaire money, but enough that I stopped checking my bank account like it was going to betray me. Enough that I could pay my rent without flinching. Enough that I could send my best friend from college the security deposit for her apartment when her landlord raised the rent and she panicked. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell my family. What would be the point? The biggest offer came on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I was drinking terrible office coffee and arguing with my engineer about a feature rollout when my lawyer texted me, "This is serious. Call me now." I stepped into the hallway, heart racing, and dialed him. His voice was calm, which terrified me. "They're offering a full acquisition," he said, "cash and stock, and they want you to stay on for a year. Then you're free." "How much?" My throat felt tight. He paused, like he was letting the number land softly. 160 million, give or take, depending on the final terms. I leaned my forehead against the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, breathing shallow, because my brain could not connect that number to me. People like me didn't get numbers like that. Invisible kids didn't get that kind of ending. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I signed a month later, not without protecting myself, not without clauses, not without making sure my team was taken care of. Everyone got bonuses. My lead engineer cried in the conference room and pretended it was allergies. The day the deal closed, my lawyer shook my hand. "Congratulations," he said. I nodded, like I was accepting a promotion. Then I walked outside, sat in my car, and stared straight ahead for a long time. I thought about calling my parents, and I didn't, because the first voice I heard in my head wasn't excitement. It was my mother's tone when she said, "That's nice, honey," while looking past me. So instead, I drove to a quiet park and sat on a bench. I watched a man teach his little girl to ride a bike. Every time she wobbled, he ran beside her. He didn't let her fall. That image stayed in my chest like a bruise. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore, but some part of me still mourned the fact that I'd never had it. A few weeks after the deal, my mom called. I almost didn't answer, but it was early afternoon, and for a second I imagined she somehow knew, that she'd finally noticed, that she was calling to ask about me. So I picked up. Her voice was bright and rushed. "Sweetie, are you coming for Thanksgiving this year?" That was it. Not "how are you?" Not "we miss you." Not even "it's been a while." Just logistics. "I don't know," I said. "Oh, come on," she sighed. "Your father really wants the whole family together." That was a lie. My father wanted the photo. He wanted the normal-looking table. He wanted the appearance of success. And Sophie wanted an audience. "I'll think about it," I said. My mom hesitated. "Sophie's bringing Chad. They're finalizing their wedding plans. It'll be good for everyone to be in the same room." Translation: "Come clap for your sister." I could have said no right then, but something colder took over, something steady. "Sure," I said. "I'll come." When I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the wall. I didn't feel fear. I felt curiosity, like I was finally going to walk back into the room where I disappeared and see what happened when I didn't play my old role. Thanksgiving arrived fast. I drove to my parents' house in a car I'd bought without financing, without thinking twice. Nothing flashy, just comfortable, quiet, safe. The house looked the same. Neatly trimmed bushes, the porch light like a spotlight. The inside smelled like cinnamon and control. My mom opened the door and did that quick up and down scan of my outfit, like she was checking for stains. "You made it," she said, already turning away. My dad appeared behind her, stiff shoulders, polite smile. "Hey." Sophie's voice floated in from the living room. "Is that him?" "Not is that my sibling. Just him." I walked in, and she stepped out like she was on a stage. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, diamond ring flashing, Chad next to her, hand on her back like he owned the moment. "Well, look who finally decided to join us," Sophie said with a grin that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Sophie," I said, calm. Chad shook my hand too hard. "So good to see you, man. Been a while." I smiled politely and let go first. Dinner started the same way it always did. Sophie talked. Everyone listened. She went on about the wedding venue, the photographer, the dress designer, the guest list drama. My parents nodded like they were watching their own investment grow. At one point, my dad raised his glass. "To Sophie," he said proudly, making us all so proud. Everyone clinked glasses. I took a sip of water. Nobody noticed. Halfway through the meal, Sophie's eyes flicked toward me like she'd remembered I existed again. "So," she said, loud enough for the table to shift attention. "What about you?" My mom leaned in, expectant but careless, like she was waiting for a short, boring update she could politely endure. My dad gave me a quick glance, then looked back at Sophie. Chad smirked like he was about to hear something small. The table went quiet in that familiar way, the way it always did when I was given my brief little moment. And I realized I could keep playing the role they wrote for me, or I could finally speak. I set my fork down, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush my words to fit into their space. I let the silence stretch. Then I looked straight at my family and said, "Actually, something happened. Actually, something happened." My mom blinked, already bracing for something awkward. My dad's eyes flicked up, then away again, like he didn't want to get stuck listening. Sophie tilted her head, polite, smug, the way you look at a child about to explain a school project. Chad leaned back like he was settling in for entertainment. I kept my face neutral. "I sold my company last month," I said. "The deal closed. I walked away with about 160 million. The air changed instantly. Sophie's fork stopped midair. Her smile froze like it didn't have permission to exist anymore. My mom's mouth opened, then closed. "What? What did you just say?" My dad didn't move. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to find the punchline. Sophie let out a quick laugh. It sounded forced, sharp. "Okay, sure, that's funny." "I'm not joking," I said. Chad scoffed. "Come on, that's not—" "I can show you," I interrupted calmly, and reached for my phone. I didn't do it dramatically. No waving screens, no smugness. Just a simple action, like I'd been asked the time. I opened an article. The acquisition had been mentioned in an industry newsletter. Not a front-page headline, but it was real. Company name, product, terms, my name as founder. I slid my phone across the table toward my dad. He stared at it, not touching it at first, like the device might bite him. Sophie leaned over, snatched it before he could even decide, and started reading. Her eyes moved fast. Her face drained slowly. Then her thumb started scrolling like she could scroll her way out of reality. My mom leaned in. "Let me see." Her voice had turned thin. Sophie shoved the phone toward her. Chad grabbed it next, squinting. His smirk was gone now. For a few seconds, the only sound was chewing from somewhere in the kitchen clock and the faint clink of someone's glass settling back on the table. My dad finally cleared his throat, and that's a lot of money. He said it like he was talking about the weather. I nodded once. Yeah. Sophie laughed again, but this time it cracked. So you're saying you're, what, rich now? I'm saying I built something, I replied. And I sold it. My mom stared at me like she was trying to recognize a stranger. Why didn't you tell us? I held her gaze. You never asked. A silence hit the table so hard it felt physical. My mom's eyebrows pulled together. That's not fair. It's true, I said, still calm. You asked about Sophie. Every week, every holiday, every dinner. You never once asked what I was working on. Not once. Sophie straightened in her chair, eyes sharp now. We didn't know you were doing anything worth asking about. There it was. The same blade, just sharper because now it came with fear. I didn't flinch. Exactly. My dad finally leaned forward. His voice was low. How did you even do that? You didn't have support, I finished for him. No, I didn't. My dad's jaw worked like he was chewing on pride. So you're telling me you made all that money and you just stayed quiet? I gave a small shrug. I've been quiet my whole life. That part came easy. My mom's face shifted quickly, like she was searching through emotions until she found one she could use. We always loved you, she said. It sounded like a statement she wanted to be true, not one she believed. I didn't argue. I just said, love isn't silence. Love is noticing. Sophie's hand tightened around her wine glass. Okay, so what? You're mad because we didn't throw you a parade? No, I said. I'm not mad. I'm done. That landed wrong for them, because done meant they couldn't fix it with a quick apology. Done meant they didn't get to rewrite the past. Chad tried to jump in, voice smoother than Sophie's. Look, man, that's impressive. Really. Congrats. But family is family. You could have shared. We're all on the same team here. I almost laughed at how fast he switched. Sophie shot him a look, then turned back to me. So what now? You're going to sit there and act like you're better than us? I met her eyes. I don't have to act. My mom gasped like I'd slapped her. My dad's face hardened. Watch your tone. I stared at him for a long second. My tone had never been the problem. My existence was. I'm not here to fight, I said. I came because you invited me. I ate dinner. Now I'm leaving. My mom's voice rose. Leaving? You just dropped that, and you're leaving? Yes. Sophie's expression shifted again, fast, calculating. I'd seen that look before when she wanted something. It was the look she used on my parents when she wanted upgrades, attention, favors. So, you have all this money, she said slowly. And you didn't think to help the family? There it was. Not how did you feel being ignored. Not are you okay. Just what can we get? I leaned back slightly. Help with what? Sophie's eyes widened, offended I'd even ask. I mean, Dad's business could expand. Mom's been stressed. And my wedding. Your wedding, I repeated softly. My mom nodded quickly, jumping in like she'd been waiting behind a curtain. It's not like we're asking for everything. Just, a contribution. For the family. My dad's voice went gruff. It's what a successful child does. I looked around the table. 3 people who spent decades training me to be small suddenly wanted me to be generous. It almost would have been funny if it didn't make me feel sick. You didn't invest in me, I said. You didn't mentor me. You didn't encourage me. You didn't even listen when I tried to tell you what I was building. Sophie rolled her eyes. Oh my God, here we go. You always make it so dramatic. I'm not being dramatic, I said. I'm being honest. My mom reached for my hand across the table. The gesture looked loving. It wasn't. It was a hook. Honey, she said, voice soft now. You're being selfish. I pulled my hand back. My dad exhaled sharply. You're going to sit there with all that money and punish us? I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm protecting myself. Sophie's cheeks flushed. So you're just going to abandon us now that you have what you want? I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with control. I didn't get what I wanted, I said. I got what I built. Then I picked up my coat. My mom's voice cracked. Please don't do this. My dad didn't say anything. He was staring at his plate like it suddenly mattered more than his child. Sophie tried one last shot, sharp and mean. You think you're special now? You'll still be the same pathetic little... I'm leaving, I cut in, flat and final. I walked out before she could finish. The cold air outside hit my face like relief. I got into my car and sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing in slow, steady pulls. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Text after text. My mom. Come back inside. We can talk. My dad. Don't make a mistake you can't undo. Sophie. You owe us. You don't get to erase family. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then I did something I'd never done before. I blocked all three of them. Not for a day. Not to be dramatic. Permanently. The next week, the calls came from unknown numbers, then emails. Then a letter showed up at my apartment from a lawyer's office I recognized. My dad's friend. The letter wasn't even subtle. It talked about family obligation and fairness and shared upbringing. It also mentioned the word entitlement without realizing how insane that sounded. I handed it to my lawyer. He read it, then looked up at me. They have no case. I know, I said. He smiled slightly. Do you want me to respond? I thought about my childhood, the empty photo albums, the quiet dinners, the way my voice always faded under Sophie's laughter. Then I said, no. Silence was the language they taught me. I just finally learned how to use it. After that, I changed my number. I moved apartments. I stopped giving my address to anyone who still knew them. And for the first time, my life felt clean. Not perfect. Not painless, but peaceful. I took a month off. I slept like my body had been waiting years to collapse. I went on long walks. I ate real meals. I went to therapy and said things out loud I'd never admitted to myself. Like how I still flinched when someone interrupted me. Like how I still expected praise to be followed by a joke. Like how part of me still waited for my father to look at me with pride. My therapist asked once, what would it mean if he never does? I swallowed and said, it would mean I have to stop needing it. So I did. I started funding scholarships for kids who reminded me of myself. Quiet kids. Smart kids. Kids who looked like they were carrying their whole life in their backpack. I built a small mentorship program with a local community college. I invested in a few startups, not because I was bored, but because I wanted other people to have a door crack open the way mine had. And sometimes, late at night, I thought about that Thanksgiving table. Sophie's frozen face. My mom's sudden panic. My father's silence. That silence said everything he never did. It wasn't regret. Not really. It was realization. He finally understood, too late, that the child he ignored didn't vanish. They just grew up without him. And the strangest part? I didn't feel revenge. I felt relief. Because now when someone asks about me, I don't shrink. I answer. And when I look in the mirror, I don't see the invisible kid anymore. I see someone who survived being unseen and chose to be seen by the right people, including myself.